I've heard about there's an issue with HOA fees and people not using HOA fees correctly.
There's an issue with how HOAs are run from top to bottom. So this brings a lot of problems into light, especially with the Surfside tragedy. So anybody who's ever lived in a neighborhood that has an HOA or has ever lived in a condo or townhouse kind of deal that has an HOA, they all know these statements to be true. First, the people who run the HOA are volunteers. These are people in the community that get elected to run the HOA. Majority of times, these people aren't coming into that job with experience on how to do it. It's not like they're professional, property managers. These are just people, retirees. I mean, you could have a guy who was like a staff sergeant or gunny sergeant. Now he's on the HOA. You know what I'm saying?
Doing it for
his best.
doing it for the potluck.
Yeah, exactly. Doing it for the love of the game, I guess. But the idea is this: the HOA every year charges a certain amount that they take into what we would call a reserve. So they spend what they need to spend and they save the rest, all right? Everybody who's on an HOA, they know that the one thing they do not want to do is what's called a special assessment. So this is the best way to explain it. Let's say every year your HOA fee is $500 a year, okay? And then the HOA takes the money, spends on lawn care, maintenance, stuff like that. Let's say something big happens to the building, like foundation issues, roof issues, exterior paint issues. And the HOA says, man, we need to spend a lot of money this year to take care of whatever this problem is. The HOAs themselves don't want to go basically door to door to their neighbors with the hat out and say, you owe $10,000 this year. Instead of $500, we really need $10,000. So it's just kind of this well-known thing that the HOAs don't like doing that because these are all volunteers who live in the same building or the same community. They don't themselves want to pay an extra $10,000 for a special assessment, so they normally don't do it. They do everything they can not to do these special assessments. And then there's the flip side. So the flip side is how do these people who become board members, we call them board members, how do they become board members? Well, normally they campaign around their little neighborhood or around their little building saying, I'm going to do whatever I can to keep your fees down. Like that's the number one concern. They're not running around saying, let's make the yards great again, or let's have Taco Tuesday. They're usually running around saying, I'm going to do whatever I can to make sure we spend the least amount of money. And everybody else is, oh, that's great. That's what we need. Let's go for Bob. Well, when Bob gets there and 10 other Bobs are there or get reelected or whatever, they don't spend money. And that's kind of what we saw with Surfside. See, the reality with Surfside is they maybe, not maybe, there's a very high likelihood they knew about these problems. And I'm going to sit here and say that some of these problems were caused by a hurricane because we heard about some roof issues. We heard about some exterior issues. They knew about these issues and they didn't have enough money to fix it. So the board members knew that they had to go around and collect, I think it was like 15 million bucks. So that was going to be somewhere in the range from, if you owned a small unit, $80,000 to $200,000 if you owned a big unit. And the board members didn't do it. I mean, it's a crazy thing to be on a board and think to yourself, I have to go ask my neighbor for $80,000. And then the neighbor down there, and then the neighbor down there. But the boards have that power. They have the power to issue a special assessment. They just don't want to do it because they think to themselves, I'm going to upset my neighbors and I'm not going to be on the board anymore. So Surfside had these big problems. They didn't spend the money to fix it, and we see the tragedy that happened. But that's kind of like a problem over and over and over again. I mean, anybody who's ever lived in a neighborhood that has an HOA, they know that that's the truth. They know that dealing with the HOA is ridiculous. And instead of the HOA really focusing on the problems that they're supposed to be focusing on, safety, property values in the community, they're normally fighting over make sure the Johnsons don't use the red paint, or make sure their fence is, the architectural white picket style. That's what they're fighting over.
The flag that you're flying in your yard is inappropriate.
Correct. Your hedges are 4 inches, and they need to be 5. And it's funny, man. This is what my mind does, because this is how crazy I am, or maybe how Irish I am when it comes to my form of politics. I think the same thing happens with like the federal government, the big government. See, the HOA, you're supposed to care about the community as far as safety, the foundation of the community. What I mean is, if you have a neighborhood HOA, you should be concerned about the roads. You should be concerned about flooding issues, retention ponds, those kind of things, right? Don't be spending your time worried about the aesthetics of the Johnsons, hedges. But they don't. They go that route. And then what they do is they try to curry favor with people so they can get reelected. It's the same thing our politicians do. They don't care about the stuff they probably should be caring about, and they spend majority of their time just going around lobbying so they can get reelected. Same thing with HOAs. It's like looking in the mirror, So that's one of the big problems that happened with Surfside. So the Surfside Association agreed to go into what we call receivership. Receivership is nothing more than, we can't manage this. Someone else please come and take over and manage this. And remember the Britney Spears thing that we were talking about? Imagine the same thing, but for the condo association. All right, someone's coming in and saying, "You guys are out. We're controlling this."
Is this an outside force?
Yeah, it's going to be an outside entity. I think what happened in this particular case with the Surfside is a judge in Miami appointed somebody.
Okay.
Specially appointed. I want to say it was a condo association lawyer, someone who deals in this kind of stuff day in, day out to handle it. Because what's going to be coming down the pipe, there's 120 or maybe 126 still unaccounted for individuals. That could be 126 separate lawsuits. So what we're talking about in the very near future is whatever assets that condo association had, it's going to start getting divided up. Whatever insurance they had, that's going to start getting divided up. So this is going to turn into what we would call a mass tort kind of case, where they got to figure out, how do we divide up this money between these people? And it's sad, man, when you're talking about these mass tort cases and how this process works, it's very sad, because you're arbitrarily evaluating human life. The person was this years old, we're only going to give them that much money for their death. If it was a young child, we may give them a little bit more. It's a very, very sad process. But that's what we're going to be seeing in the next couple months with Surfside.
Literally putting dollar bills behind people's lives.
Yeah, it's not just putting dollar bills. Imagine seeing a spreadsheet that has that whole formula for this many lives, this much money. I mean, I've seen those spreadsheets, and it's crazy when you're looking at it. Like all the different categories of how someone's going to get more money or less money. It's all done with this massive formula. And when you get these spreadsheets, when you're involved in these mass tort cases, it's just like, this is where we're at, I guess, huh? Because they're not going to try individually those cases. I can tell you that right now. No judge wants to individually try those cases. They want to get these people paid and have these people go about their life. That's what they want. So how does that work? We come up with these crazy formulas.
Now, would all those cases be bundled into one case and they just write a check to everybody and
Yeah, that's how it's going to go down. There's different ways you can do it, but what you're going to do is you're going to have, more likely than not, this individual we call a special master. Okay, so they're going to be like the person looking over how this process works, and sometimes these people make judgment calls. So if let's just say I'm representing in the Surfside case, someone in the Surfside case. All right, let's say I'm representing someone's grandmother. Say she was 75. All right, she had a big family, kids, grandkids. She was well loved, well liked. My job representing that individual, basically that estate, is to get the most money I can for them. Okay, that's my job. I should not care how much money these other people get. My job is to represent Data State and to get the most money for those kids. So there's going to be times that I'm going to be arguing with somebody else saying, no, my client deserves that money. My client was a nurse in World War II. My client, whatever, my client has a story in her life. So that special master kind of acts as like the referee. He's the one that sometimes makes the decisions on how to set up this formula. And we've done it many different ways. You can set up the formula based on someone's age. So if someone's younger, they have more years to live, they have more life to live, and they should receive more money than someone who's older, who presumably doesn't have that lifespan to live. Like, my little example, I'm representing someone who's 75. I think right now, the average lifespan may be 78 or 79. So she's in the later years of her life. She may not get as much money as someone who's 15 years old. But all that is hashed out in this massive formula where you basically run your client's information in it, and on the other end comes out some value of that life. And it's crazy, but that's what's going to happen.
Was that Ben Stiller's job, I think, in Along Came Polly?
Yeah. He was an actuary.
Is that what that is?
Kind of. I mean, it's very much the same thing. So I think he was an actuary for insurance companies.
Okay.
But it's basically the same thing. I mean, we're trying to we start with a pot. So the first thing we got to figure out is how much money, how much assets are out there for these people. Okay. In this particular case, I don't know. I heard there's $48 million in insurance money, which seems insanely high to me. But you start with, here's how much money's in the pot. And then you kind of work yourself backwards to different categories of injury or amount or deserve. And when you're talking about multiple death cases, you can't categorize it on injuries, which we would normally like to do. You got to categorize it on other things like age, how big's the estate, how many kids they have, these different things. So you kind of work backwards where you figure out what your category is going to be, you throw the numbers in the category, and then you divide that by the actual amount of money. So you want it to all come out to zero at the end, where all the money's being divided up. So it's a crazy process, and I don't like it. I'd rather have a trial. I'd rather have normal people say this is how much it is. But the reality, to almost every case I ever have, there's only so much money in the bucket. That's the truth.